and then you can just drag it. You can also click on this line, and then that brings the slider to the value. You can also right click and enter the value, and as long as it's within the range, it will set the value to that specific value. So it's pretty simple. Your name is there, and then the description that you entered, that field of description, shows up in the tooltip. You can also add an image to your tooltip, is one of the options there. So you can see that every time that I drag this, the solution gets updated. In case you don't want this behavior and you want to have another control that triggers the solution update, that's also possible. You can also sort of disable and enable the controls just like we do in the Windows form. So we quickly check how we do that, and then we come back and test them. So the first thing is, if you want to, let's say, you have two controls in your component, and one goes and triggers the update, and one just stays standby. How that works? So, for instance, I can create a button. So there is also a push button that you can create, and here I'm declaring it, and then you can add that to your component. Let's just give it a name, and let's call it update, and then the description is click to update the solution. Yeah, we didn't. Everything else is the text is important because that's just the title, and you can have, if you leave it empty, it would get the same as the name of the control. I think we can leave it. The rest is self-explanatory. You can have an icon. You can fix the width of the button. If you don't fix it, it will expand all the way, and so on. Just things that you can try. And I don't want to explain all the parameters. Obviously, we don't have time. So we have the slider added, and we can now add the custom control, the push button, just below the slider. So as you add control, they just happens to be under each other. So, and then here, instead in the slider, I would set a value of the update solution property to false, and I think this should stops the slider updating our solution, and the default behavior of push button will do that for us. Let's see if this works. So let's get that. I think the push button will have as well. We have a value, and then we can control that there would be a value 1 for the state of pressing, and then value -1 for the state of releasing. But as of now, I don't really need that. So let's see how it works right now. Okay, so what we expect is that if we move the slider, the value shouldn't update, and if we press the button update, then it gets updated. So let's see if that's the case. So now I move and nothing happens, and then when we update, you can see that it updates the component. As you could see that your things can get very cluttered because you add the controls, and they just create a huge component. one way to kind of organize your controls is use groups. So the groups are very helpful when you want to create cluster of those or blocks of those parameters that controls some certain aspects of your code or some certain things that are related to each other, and then you can collapse them and make them very compact. And here what I have created for you, we're just having two control. We're going to add another one, which is a group, and we call it my controls. And then it just controls whatever, it's just a description that you can have. By the way, you could have also an icon for your group. So when they're collapsed, you can see the icon on the right, just opposite to the title, and so other things. But here we'll leave it with a null. Whenever you see the tooltip diagram, this is the icon that shows on the tooltip, so that's also you can add it. And then I have after these I can add my controls. So the first control goes there is the slider double, and then the second will be the push button, let's say. And I don't really need now, I would just add a group, and I don't need to add the other things because they're already packed into a group. So just add a group. I also didn't declare the group because I don't really need to do that, because the group has a current value that you can access, but it just tells you if it's expanded or collapsed, but doesn't really matter for our solution, I guess. So that's why I didn't add it up there. I didn't declare it. Okay, let's see how this looks like now. This should put those into a group, and then we can access it from there. So here I have now everything hidden into this group that you have to open, and then everything shows up, and then you can close it. You can see that if I zoom out, things will get also invisible. So this makes a little bit, helps a little bit your rendering process for the Grasshopper canvas, and it's basically reduce the overload. There's a lot of rendering going on here. And you could have also group inside the group, then you could see that they kind of get those insets in each other, and they get indent, like shows a kind of hierarchy, and it's easier to read. You can remove that behavior if you want, or just by coding, I guess. Now the next thing is to see if we can actually create a sort of interaction between the controls, like what you do in Windows Form application, that you have events, you can turn off and something when you switch on something else, and things like this. And this would be, I think, the last thing I would explain, and we can move on to the next section. So the question is, if I have a, let's do another control. I call it, it's a control called toggle switch that you can turn on and off, just like it's checkbox but with a nice button. So I call it toggle switch, and then here you would just say toggle switch is, and give it a name, description. You would say this will disable the slider, for example. And then you have a default view, which is false, and then you can have an icon as well for your tooltip. This we don't need. And I would add this on top of the my slider. So that's not enough. You have to see what we can do with a toggle switch. Some of the controls, they have events, so you can use those events. And the way you use them is that you assign just a event handler to, so this is an event we're going to use on value change. That's the only event actually they have. And we create that. I use tab and I have created a template here. And what I'm going to do here, I'm going to check on, I'm going to enable the slider when the toggle switch is on. That's what I'm going to do basically. So I have the slider, and I will say this enable is when or is equal to the toggle switch value. That's all. And that should be casted to bool, obviously. So when the toggle switch changes, there would be an event. It raises an event, and then the event we are listening to that from here, and we set that slider enable state to the current value of the toggle switch. Normally, this is good enough if you define this somewhere else, not in the scope of register. Register input always happens once, but if you do it somewhere else, which I don't recommend, you better to remove that, even though we don't have to do this now. But it's just better practice to make sure that's not, you're not going to have two handlers at the same time. So let's check this. How we did you? Yes, everything is set. We added, and then you can have a look now. Okay. I think that's about it. We go through a list of the controls, and if there's anything I have to explain, we'll do that. Then we can look at the code a little bit and see how things works. So I have a control here, and then I have this nice toggle switch, and by default you have to turn your you have to set your state of the slider manually. So if your default value is disabled, then you do that because there won't be an event at an initialization stage. So that is just something you do in your code. But when you, then after that, your component is there and it works just like this. So when this is disabled, you can see that's grayed out, and then you can bring it back by putting this, by turning on your switch. So so you have events, you can group things, you can sort of decide if the control updates the solution or not. Also you have things that you can add. For instance, you can layout your control just like you do in the Windows Phone application. The things are not so difficult to understand. I wouldn't go through all of them, but for example, you have the stack panel. The stack panel here is not really the stack panel. Yeah, in a way, it just mimics the behavior of that, but it's to something else. So you can have a stack panel, for example, and you could do, for instance, you can create a stack panel here and make a, the name is just, doesn't matter, but it has to be a unique name. And then you can put your controls here. The other thing is that you can actually set, okay, I want this stack panel to be horizontal. So you maybe like to have some controls next to each other rather than to have it then just below each other. So if that's the case, you can, for example, have the stack panel horizontal, and then there would be your controls. So I would say I have a toggle switch, and then I have let's say a slider. I don't know how this will look, but and then you can add it to your add custom control, the stack panel. So let's just get rid of this for now, and also this. So I have created a panel, but it's horizontal. So I suppose I should get my toggle switch just before the slider on the left side. That's how it works. If you make it vertical, it will just work as normal. So let's have a look. I would just save this file next time so you don't have to reopen it. So that's the stack panel of how it works. You have your toggle switch. So in this case, maybe it doesn't look really exciting, but you could have probably a checkbox with without a title, and when you check it, then you can disable your thing, or you have some degree slider, the one that looks like a circle, you can put them together in one group, but that's possible. So you can lay out your stuff. Okay, then what else is there? There is also, let's have a look quickly what we have in terms of you clone the project or you, however you do, you download it. You first need to install a package. You want to build this thing. There is a package, a NuGet package, which is called it's a extended WPF toolkit. I use this for this numeric up-down control in the slider because there's no really native numeric of WPF. It doesn't have it. So this I use for that, and it works just fine, I think. So, for example, if you look at this control, that I already have a group of control here, and that's a normal slider. This is an integer slider, but by default it shows some numbers. And here, this is my custom control that you just we'll look at the code right now. It has, if you click on it, it does something for updating your user interface, and then I get that information and update my user interface within the bound of control. So how I did it, I as you can see, I have implemented the GH custom control. This is where you do things. I kept some data. This is my data structures that I have to. These are just things that I did here. Has nothing to do with the with our base class. And this is the text. Also, I have a text property that I wrote, and you saw it in the. I can show you again, and you can see it here. This is where the text comes. And these are what I have override only as for the size and offset. And this does for me the event for the mouse click. So there is a custom event here. So I can listen to this from my code. So you override the mouse click, and you can actually see what mouse click happened. For example, if the if now the custom is here is let's say you can say if for example, there was one click, or which button was clicked, so you're interested only on left, then you raise your event from here. So you just filter the other events for your class that you want to use this control. And here, and if you want to do some other event, you just say, okay, if that was right click, then you raise another event. So, and then you catch it on there. So this is, it just pass all the events by mouse, but you can filter it right here. So just keep in mind that this just all the events happening, and then you have to filter. Here's the where the magic happens. You have to do all the things here. You can see that I'm getting access to bounds. This is already, it's already made for me from the base class. And I offset that bound by an offset amount that I defined here too. So I get my rectangle here. And then here I just fill the rectangle with a color depending on the position of the cursor. So I get this value. This tells me that if where is my mouse cursor, and then if this happened to be within the bound, which means that mouse is hovering bound, I will fill this rectangle with this certain color. If it's not, then I'll do it in a different color, so that you can sort of react to your mouse, your cursor position. Then you always, of course, you notice that you have to kind of nothing but this black line right now. There's nothing, and I feel that you can see that it reacts to my mouse, and that's already explained in a couple of lines above. So then if I would just do things based on some sort of information that I have. For instance, if there's a collisions, for example, here, I would render some sort of, I would just draw lines or something within that bound. So it's here important that always you take the reference from the bound that you get from your base class, and then that would be your local sort of coordinate system. So you do it whatever you want there. So I can just go from left to the right, and here I'm going from left to the right, and I do some lines based on the information that I have in this area. And you render your text inside the rectangle using this string format that I have here. So I think it's pretty simple. You have a rectangle and you do whatever you want there. You shouldn't go out of it. That's the whole rule. And the clicks and everything else is already handled, and you just perform whatever task you want to do here.